John Gotti's relationship with Roy DeMeo and the Westies. The FBI picked up a conversation between Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti on a bug placed in Ruggiero's home, discussing a hit on Roy DeMeo, where the men were said to be speaking on John Gotti turning down a hit request from Gambino boss Paul Castellano. We'll get back to the tape conversation regarding Gotti, but first let's get into the relationships between Roy DeMeo, the Westies, and the Gambino family, and how these relationships came to be formed. For those of you who aren't familiar with Roy DeMeo, let's first break down his situation with the Gambino family. Roy DeMeo is an infamous gangster from New York City, operating out of Brooklyn with the Gambino family. DeMeo, till this day, is known as one of the most violent mobsters in history and is said to have murdered and dismembered from 150 to 250 people with this crew known as the DeMeo crew, and even had a name for the way they did their hits called the Gemini Method, named after the DeMeo crew's club, the Gemini Lounge. First, whoever was in the DeMeo crew's crosshairs would be lured down to the Gemini Lounge, and once inside, the person would be led towards the back of the bar, leading to an apartment connected to the bar, where one member would hop out with a silenced pistol and shoot the target in the head. Then a towel would be wrapped around their head to stop the blood from spilling, and they'd be stabbed through the heart to stop the blood from pumping out of the wound. The body would then be hung and drained in the bathtub before they would dismember it and have it sent out to the Fountain Avenue dump for disposal. Obviously, DeMeo, being a capo of his crew, was an earned privilege. DeMeo was not only capable and willing to take on murder contracts for the Gambinos, but he also made lots of money for the family. DeMeo was running a stolen car ring where he would have the cars shipped overseas to Saudi Arabia, which ultimately led to DeMeo's demise. Boss Paul Castellano was said to have ordered DeMeo's murder because of the law enforcement attention it was getting. He believed DeMeo would flip and turn government witness. Although finding someone willing and able to take DeMeo out wasn't an easy task because a lot of people feared him, on January 20th, 1983, Roy DeMeo was found dead in the trunk of his car. Back in the 70s, the Gambinos were having a problem with the Westies, a group of Irish gangsters who operated out of Hell's Kitchen, because the Westies were delaying a construction job, and DeMeo was the man who would broker a deal between the two sets. The deal was that the Westies would stop delaying the work, and they would in turn become members of the Gambino family and kick up 10% of their profits. As part of DeMeo fixing things between the Westies and the Gambinos, he had finally convinced Paul Castellano to make DeMeo a made member of the family, and in 1977, he was inducted in. DeMeo would be the liaison between the Westies and the Gambinos, and also as part of his new rank in the Gambino family, he agreed to get any of his crew's hits okayed by the boss and could no longer deal in drugs, which DeMeo agreed to, but never stopped doing. Up until the 70s, the Westies were run by Mickey Spillane, but a young up-and-coming Irish gangster named Jimmy Coonan was gunning for Spillane, not only for his position, but also as revenge for his father. When Coonan was younger, Mickey Spillane had kidnapped Coonan's father for ransom and had pistol-whipped him during the kidnapping, and Coonan never forgot about it. In the mid-70s, Spillane had lots of enemies and moved out of Hell's Kitchen to a neighborhood in Queens, which gave Coonan more control over the West Side. DeMeo, who wanted to become more than an associate to the Gambinos, knew boss Paul Castellano wanted to expand the Gambinos' influence into Hell's Kitchen, so he reached out to a mutual friend and was introduced to Jimmy Coonan. The man who connected Coonan and DeMeo was Danny Grillo. He had also told DeMeo about Coonan's similarities to DeMeo when it came to doing hits. Both men weren't afraid to get their hands dirty, and both had a knack for dismembering their victims to dispose of their bodies, and DeMeo was impressed and wanted Coonan in his crew. DeMeo was also well informed on Coonan's distaste for Mickey Spillane, which was also shared amongst Gambino boss Paul Castellano over a beef Spillane and the Gambinos were having regarding the profits of the construction of the Javits Center in New York City. DeMeo would kill two birds with one stone, both gaining Coonan's respect and pleasing the boss Paul Castellano by taking Spillane out outside his apartment in Queens on May 13, 1977. Coonan was excited to be associated with DeMeo because Coonan always wanted to be big time and had big Mafia dreams, bigger than just running Hell's Kitchen, and DeMeo was his way in. Coonan and his partner Mickey Featherstone were called in to a sit-down with Big Paul. DeMeo, being present, told the men upon their arrival to deny any involvement, even though DeMeo knew Coonan was responsible. Castellano scolded the men for their reckless behavior, but before informing them that they were now part of the family and would be kicking up 10% of their profits. Coonan was pleased just to be part of the Mafia at this point, but his partner Mickey Featherstone and the rest of the crew did not like having to answer to the Italians or kicking up a percent of their money, but Coonan didn't want to hear it. The Westies' relationship with the Gambinos would continue for years, but would get rocky over an argument between Featherstone and a member of the Gambinos. Coonan started hanging around the Italians more and more, but his crew not so much. Featherstone and other members had talks of taking Coonan out, but never attempted it. Around the same time, DeMeo and Castellano came into problems of their own. DeMeo's international car theft ring had been busted, and Castellano was indicted on the case, which caused big problems for DeMeo. Castellano wanted DeMeo taken out for fear he would flip on the family. John Gotti was offered the contract by Big Paul, but the Gotti crew turned it down because they were either unable to get to DeMeo or just didn't want the war on their hands. Other people were also offered the hit but turned it down because of the fear people had for DeMeo. DeMeo knew he had a target on his back and was basically in hiding at this point, and the only people who could get to DeMeo was his own crew. In January of 1983, DeMeo was summoned for a meeting by Nino Gaggi, where the men from DeMeo's crew executed him. After DeMeo's hit, Gambino member Dan Marino would step up in his place as the new contact to Coonan and the Westies. The rest of the Westies members were actively looking to take Coonan out in the 1980s for selling out the neighborhood to the Italians and wanted Mickey Featherstone to take his place as leader, but Coonan was able to persuade some members to stick with them, and the hit attempt on Coonan was dropped. Things went sour between Coonan and Featherstone when Featherstone turned down a hit ordered by Coonan. Coonan would go on to have another Westies member, Billy Boken, disguise himself to look like Featherstone and kill somebody, ultimately getting Mickey Featherstone convicted of murder. Mickey found out it was Coonan who set him up and decided to become a cooperator against Coonan and the Westies. He testified on the stand for 4 weeks, where Coonan was sentenced to 75 years in prison and Mickey's murder conviction was overturned. In that same trial, Westies member Jimmy McElroy, who was sentenced to 60 years and desperate to get out, tried making a deal with the feds, stating that John Gotti ordered the shooting of a union official, John O'Connor, which was executed by the Westies. But McElroy was deemed not credible as a witness, but the Westies did have a connection to Gotti in the form of a dirty juror. Gotti had just took out Paul Castellano, making Gotti new boss of the Gambino family, and in 1986, he was on trial for racketeering. The Westies and Gambino's relationship had somewhat deteriorated at this point, but if something big was going on, they would still work together. Vasko Randonicek was a Serbian man who is now running the Westies, and he had affiliations to a man named George Pape, who informed Vasko he was on the jury in Gotti's trial, having lied about his mob associations, and offered to sell his vote in Gotti's favor for $60,000. Vasko took the information to Sammy Gravano, who took it to Gotti, who agreed and paid the money up front to secure his freedom. Gotti beat the case, in which he was being tried for murder, hijacking, and loan sharking, and this information was confirmed when Sammy the Bull turned government cooperator in 1992. Due to gentrification in Hell's Kitchen and men cooperating, the Westies faded out, but the Gambinos are still active throughout New York City. Now getting back to the conversation between Angelo Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, which was picked up on a bug placed in Ruggiero's home by the FBI, it was discussed that Castellano put a hit on DeMeo, but had difficulty finding someone to do the job. Gene was heard saying that his brother John was wary of taking the contract, being that DeMeo had, quote, an army of killers around him. In the conversation, it was said that Gotti had less than 10 kills under his belt, and DeMeo was believed to have 37 kills that they knew about at the time. Sammy the Bull later confessed that the hit was given to Frank DeChico, who couldn't get to DeMeo and passed the hit on to men in DeMeo's crew. This was as much documented information as I could find on the relationship between DeMeo, the Westies, and John Gotti. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell to make sure you get notifications for all new videos. Thank you for your support, and thank you for watching. It's Wise Guy TV.